And so let's start. And I would like just to start by remarking something that Christelle already said in her speech in the beginning, which is to say what is Claf. So Claf is an intergovernmental organization that was created under the auspices of UNESCO in 1962 at the 10th General Conference of UNESCO. And it's hosted since its creation by CBPF here in Brazil. The mission of Claf is to foster and facilitate the study and development of physics in Latin American and Caribbean countries through the promotion of collaboration, exchanges between institutions and individuals from these and other countries, as well as assistance in the training of human resources and the acquisition of the necessary financial resources for these purposes. So you can see from that Claf in itself is not a research institution, but it's an institution to promote the development of a field of science in Latin America. And in fact, the creation of Claf happened at a time where UNESCO was decentralizing its structure from its headquarters, and it's created as a result of the creation of the Office of UNESCO in Uruguay and discussions that came at that time. At the time, in fact, I learned, discussing with some people at UNESCO in Paris, that they created the Latin American Center for Chemistry, Latin American Center for Mathematics, for Biology, all of which disappeared over time, but Claf survived. So basically, what was happening at the time is that from the countries that were already strong in physics or had a strong beginning of physics research in the continent, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, the groups started to organize Latin American-wide schools to start to promote the research over the continent. And the third of these Latin American schools, which happened in 59, 60, and 61, and I didn't know that, I learned recently from one of our historians, that this third Latin American school had 100 participants. So 100 participants in a school of physics in the 1960s in Latin America is not a small number, no? So there was a lot of momentum that was being built, and immediately after this third school, there was a proposal made to UNESCO by the Brazilian government with the support of other countries of the region to create a regional center. And this regional center then was discussed at a UNESCO expert meeting that happened in Rio, and I believe this happened in the original Itamaraty Palace here in Rio de Janeiro. And soon after, in the next year, there was the creation of Claf at the General Assembly. So what is the medium-term plan of Claf today? So Claf, as you could have seen before, I didn't point out. So this is just a few cities where there are labs that were created as a direct result of the action of Claf by funding the formation of physicists in the region that then went back to their countries and started new research lines. So this is a mark of Claf in the continent and testimony of its relevance. But today, where physics is already well developed and well spread in many countries, the focus is on integration. The next step to develop the physics in the region or science in the region passes through integration. And this comes nowadays with the name of science diplomacy. So bringing together institutions and governments to discuss how they can act together in opportunities to integrate what they already are doing and to develop new things. So there are some lines that we have been pushing in this front. One of them is the regionalization of large facilities and laboratories. So we are discussing with labs like Sirius here in Brazil, with the neutron being laboratory that's going to be soon inaugurated in Argentina, and other laboratories in the region. How can we improve the internationalization or the regionalization of these labs, increasing the number of users from Latin America and user groups from Latin America? So this is very important because, as Antoine Petit mentioned, it's these infrastructures that actually create real cooperation, not just mobility programs. Nevertheless, we are also developing mobility programs, and here Claf again plays on the fact that it's an intergovernmental organization. So we are making agreements with agencies in different countries to create a network of mobility programs. And these agreements, they have a common characteristic that they are funded by the agencies, but they are managed by Claf. So we have a committee that manages this mobility in a coordinated way trying to tap on what the countries say and define in the General Assembly or the Directive Council that are the critical areas for cooperation in the region, so that we bring money, national money, to act in a regional way. And Claf is the institution that can do this. So on here, like last December, we signed a cooperation agreement with CNPq worth 1 million reais a year for this mobility. We are signing one with CONICET that is worth 500,000 for this year, and there are others that we are being discussing. And a new thing that I'm pushing within Claf actually is this regional cooperation forum in physics, which is to, together with UNESCO, to create a permanent forum of discussion involving the scientific community, the governments, the diplomatic offices, to be in constant contact to identify opportunities for cooperation in a multilateral way when they appear. You know, our countries oscillate a lot in the availability of funding for research or the political support for research from government to government. So by having a constant group of discussion, we can try to seize the opportunities as they appear in a more continuous way and identify what are the priorities. Claf also works through thematic units, which are motivated by the community that says we want to push these fronts of research. And of course, one of them is astroparticle physics, which is the important one for us here today. A particularly dear one to me is history of physics, because it's also history of Claf in South America or in Latin America, and help us understand. So this is history of physics in Latin America and help us understand how this subject developed in the continent. This network is, in fact, a strategic partnership, I think, for the field in the region. And its goal is to establish a real network around the current and next generation world-leading astroparticle physics and cosmology experiments in the continent, most of which have direct involvement of CNRS. So as I mentioned, when I started working in these international collaborations, particularly when I was appointed as one of the responsibles for SWGO, the first thing that I realized is that once you have an experiment, basically Latin American participation in the experiment is restricted to the host country with very few exceptions. So what you have is islands of impact and islands of development. Sometimes you are even reproducing the same science, the same R&D development in different labs, and people don't talk to each other. This happens in cooperation with CERN, where we had a couple of months ago here a meeting between Brazil and Chile for participation at CERN, sponsored by Claf. And the Chilean community didn't know the Brazilian community. They meet at CERN, but they don't meet in Latin America. So this is a problem because, of course, there is a lot of potential that is lost and a lot of impact in the development of the continent that is lost. So this is at the basis of the motivation of this network. And the fact that CNRS has the right instrument and is in a leadership position and has a lot of experience in all these infrastructures makes it the ideal partner for this. I mentioned here a series of labs. The ones marked with a star doesn't have a direct CNRS institutional involvement, but all the others have. No, some are in planning. So you see the number of experiments, the potential that is to be untapped. And even the ones that that have this star and therefore don't have a institutional involvement of CNRS work with the same technologies that the other experiments. So it's actually a possibility of expansion with basically just organization of network, no additional investment necessary. You have labs already doing these things. So the network then has the purpose of bringing together these islands, but also using the fact that we will have regional mobility around this to take astroparticle physics to other regions of the continent and also discover new talent in other countries that are not involved in these experiments. So through Claf, in fact, any person, any young student beyond the countries that were explicitly mentioned because they have already research activity could participate somehow or could cooperate with us. And this opens the opportunity to unleash new human resources, no? And then develop new countries and bring new countries into the partnership. This is a subset of the institutions that are directly involved through the experiments that were mentioned in the previous page. So there are many. And here I just want to highlight, so what kinds of things we expect to have as a result of this network. Of course, doing research, but improve the development of research locally by integrating what's already done in the various labs. So here is just an example of 3 experiments that are very close to what I do. Like we could include Heron here as well, and cosmology experiments, but just to make the case, I mean, the hardware, the science, the analysis techniques of all these 3 experiments are very similar. We have groups doing these things alone here in Latin America, all with collaborations with CNRS and France and international partners. And it's obvious to me that the productivity will increase a lot simply by putting them to work together, which is one of the conditions of the network. Some numbers that were already mentioned. 6 large international experiments. 3 are operational. 1 is about to start, and 2 are in preparation. Over 150 researchers directly involved from 30 Latin American institutions in 7 countries, because there are some countries that are sponsored by other countries to be members. I mean, Brazil sponsored, for example, Bolivia to participate in OGE for a decade. These experiments together produce 40 to 50 publications a year and have produced over 500 PhD theses, 1/3 with Latin American students. So the numbers are huge. How we plan to organize the network? I mean, as Christelle said, we are starting to organize, but we have thought of some ideas. And one of them is to first identify the main pillars of physics, of science that are involved here, which is cosmic ray and neutrinos, gamma rays, and cosmology. And these are, of course, represented by specific experiments. But the idea is that this network will work in a transversal way, not only through countries, in the sense that our idea is to make bridges of collaboration between the countries, but also through the experiments, transversally in the experiments, so that we can combine technologies, techniques of observation, and put everything together to increase the critical mass and the impact and the value of the resources that are already involved. To do this, and not to have the vision of the network restricted by a few number of scientists, the idea is to create a steering committee that has coordinators, and then representatives from these different pillars, so that we have the experts helping us to understand what are the fields and the fronts where we can push projects more efficiently. Of course, the organization of events to exchange information and knowledge of what's being done in the region and the schools is fundamental. But then the idea is to have some seed funding for these transversal projects. And the seed funding, of course, is to integrate the labs, therefore seed funding for mobility. But we hope that once the network starts, we can also acquire funds from other national agencies into this. One example that is readily available already are the mobility programs of Claf. Astroparticle physics will be one of the thematic areas of these mobility programs. So from day one, we can already have some fellowships coming from these additional funds to complement the network, and this is the idea. So I guess this gave a general view of the motivations and objectives, and thank you very much.